It's Friday, August 8th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. So, since Donald Trump took office, the administration has been trying to change or warp the idea of who gets to live in the U.S. legally and even who gets to be an American. You've seen it. I've talked about it a bunch on the show. If you're a longtime listener, the White House doing things like ending legal protected status from people here who were fleeing for their lives, ending the asylum seeker program, going after green card holders at their immigration hearings. And then there are the broader attacks on actual citizens, ICE raiding naturalization ceremonies. They've arrested and detained already naturalized citizens. They've arrested and detained U.S.-born citizens, most recently and most publicly during its raids in L.A., where officers were described as coming ready to attack. And the administration has already deported U.S. citizens, including a 2-year-old who was born on U.S. soil to immigrant parents, according to the family's attorney. And of course, the administration is currently fighting to change the foundational definition of birthright citizenship, twisting it into something that the law doesn't recognize it as. And the U.S. Supreme Court is expected to take that up this fall. And then there's the fact that Trump has publicly thrown out the idea of trying to take away citizenship from people born in the U.S. to at least one U.S.-born parent, which, to be clear, he can't do. And I don't mean that in the way that, the law says he can't, but he's going to do it anyway and no one's going to stop him. I mean that there is no mechanism, there's no process for that to happen. But again, that doesn't mean that he's not going to try. And it got me thinking about who among us, as Americans, may be the test group, the clinical trial for the administration to remove U.S. citizenship from people with U.S.-born parents who have citizenship. The answer is adoptees. People brought here, usually as children, so without their consent, by U.S.-born, usually white, usually Christian families, the kind of people that the Trump administration isn't going after, but their adopted children are. It's why I wanted to talk to Greg Luce. Greg is the founder of the Adoptee Rights Law Center, which is based in Minneapolis. He's the executive director of Adoptees United, Inc., a nonprofit that helps ensure adoptees have equal rights. He's an adoption lawyer, though, as you're about to hear, he's increasingly becoming much more of an immigration attorney, and he's an adoptee himself. And we talk a lot about the fear that's in the adopted community right now, fear that they might get caught up in an ICE raid, that their documentation won't be believed by ICE agents because it doesn't look like what ICE agents are used to seeing when it comes to proving citizenship. We talk about people finding out that they aren't actually citizens because their parents or the adoption agency didn't follow through with the naturalization process. And these people are finding that out as adults in their 30s, 40s, even as late as in their 60s. And we talk about how adoptees, roughly 2% of the population, may be canaries in the coal mine for the administration's efforts to, like I said, change or warp who gets to be a citizen. It's a really interesting conversation and one that I unfortunately but increasingly think is worth paying attention to. As always, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. It's just $5 a month to get access to all sorts of bonus content. And as always, share the show on social media. It's MIMS Newspod. That's MIMS Newspod. All one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on X and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. All right, let's get to my conversation with Greg Luce. We are heading into the final stretch of summer, and let's face it, you need some new sunglasses. Your old ones are scraped or scuffed, or maybe, like I did, you sat on them because you left them in the car, and it's time to replace them so you can finish out the summer in style. That's where Aquila comes in. Independently designed and handcrafted in LA, they offer timeless style, uncompromising quality, all without the inflated price tag. And their styles are unisex and look great. I really like their Essential line. It's a cool throwback look that really fits my day-to-day style. I can throw them on and know that they'll fit my fit. And you can feel good about wearing Aquila sunglasses too, whether it's the UV blocking sunglasses, the blue light clear lenses, or the prescription eyewear. It's all made from 50% recycled materials, including recycled lenses, eco-friendly plant-based plastics, and it's shipped to you in sustainable, plastic-free, biodegradable packaging. Plus, all Aquila frames come back with a 1-year warranty, just in case anything should happen to them. You just ship them back and they'll fix them up, or they'll get you some new ones. So right now, you can get an exclusive 10% off your next pair of Aquila glasses, their highest discount of the summer, when you use the code MIMS25 at checkout. That's MIMS 25 on your entire order. Now, Make It Make Sense does get a cut of that, but, it's just another reason to go check them out. Protect your eyes, support the show. It's a win-win. So visit Aquila.la, that's AKILA, and use the promo code MIMS25 at checkout. Aquila, unisex handmade sunglasses from LA. Independent style meets unbeatable prices. Elevate your look with modern eyewear concepts. All right, let's get on with the episode. I will say I was really thrilled that you're also a Minnesota boy. I think that,
right.
that this is great. There are so few of us out there who get to talk to each other when I'm separated from them that I miss, like I was saying earlier, I miss Minneapolis this time of year, and I miss up north in Minnesota this time of year. Michigan is great. Folks here who are listening to that, it's great. It's just, it's not the same thing. It doesn't feel the same. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure you've done the hand thing too. With,
we're somewhere down here, which is fine. It's whatever.
Right.
Greg, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
So I want to start first here. What has it been like in your world in the last 6 months, in the world of adoptee rights? I have to imagine, and it'll be the things that we'll talk about here, but there's been a lot of fear, a lot of confusion, a lot of worry out there. So what has it been like for you?
I've been swamped with work of trying to tamp down that fear sometimes with intercountry adoptees who have real fears and questions about their immigration or citizenship. And I've been swamped in making sure that they have the documents they need so that they are assured that they belong in the U.S. and have legal right to stay here as U.S. citizens. And so I've been swamped by that work in the last 6 months, but it was also anticipated work. We started a free pro bono legal clinic for intercountry adoptees about a year ago. And with the anticipation there could be an issue coming up, and we were correct. And so that we were prepared, but I hadn't been as prepared for the onslaught of work that came in from intercountry adoptees who have legitimate fears.
Yeah, when people come to you, what are the kind of things that they're talking about?
It varies. It often is they need to make sure that they have the documents they need to prove that they are U.S. citizens. It could be that they don't have those documents and we need to get them. It could be that there was something that happened in the past that made them so that they are vulnerable to being in enforcement, in ICE enforcement. It could be that they don't really have any status of a lawful status in the U.S. We got to figure that out. So it goes from the very complicated cases, those who really don't have proof of lawful entry into the country because they are essentially, in many respects, smuggled in. And then those who are U.S. citizens by law, but just don't have the proof of it. And that's the paperwork we need to work for to get their paperwork, to get their documentation.
I think this is a good time here at the beginning, too, to sort of break down how these adoptions happen. I mean, you mostly work with adult adoptees.
Right.
But how does this practically work, or how is it supposed to work? And then when you talk about people who are smuggled in and then they're adopted by families, how does that even work? Because it would seem to me that an adopted agency would need to have some sort of documentation.
Right. And so, here you have to sort of separate the U.S. born adopted population and the intercountry adopted, those who are born overseas or in a country outside the U.S. For domestic U.S. born, it's state by state, but basically you go through the court system to have that adoption approved. Sometimes in many states, an adoption agency is part of that. In some states, you could just have an attorney that's handling the adoption itself, but there is at the end a full and final adoption in a state court, and that's the only adoption that you need. Intercountry adoption is very highly regulated. It arose out of essentially late 1940s, early 1950s, started essentially in Greece and some of the countries that were coming out of post-war issues. But then it really exploded with the work of the Holt family in Oregon to adopt hundreds of, and then ultimately hundreds of thousands of Korean adoptees from Korea. I would say basically almost 200,000 from Korea after the Korean War.
Wait, tell me about this family. What do you mean they adopted hundreds of thousands, 200,000 people? What do you
They
mean?
didn't, but they worked to, then they created Holt International, which is now probably one of the biggest adoption agencies in the world.
Yeah.
And it was Bertha Holt and Harry Holt, who were essentially farmers in Oregon that developed the system of bringing South Korean children, infants, to the U.S. for adoption by U.S. parents. And that started in the mid 50s and really started to take off in the late 50s into the 60s.
So a lot of this adoption law then isn't even 100 years old. It's maybe 75 years old, generously.
For intercountry adoption, it's sort of, I would say it's within 50 years of a development of law. For U.S.-born adoptees, that goes back more than 100 years to the first adoption statute in Massachusetts in the middle of the 1800s.
Okay. And so often then what you're dealing with, and you said this just before we started recording, is that you're increasingly becoming an immigration attorney as much as you're becoming and remaining an adoption attorney.
Right. In fact, I'm not an adoption attorney. I don't handle adoptions. I'm the only person who really that I know of in the United States that calls himself an adoptee rights lawyer, because I only represent adult adopted people. And in the past, that was a lot of petitioning a court, let's say in Minnesota, to get your records because they're closed and sealed, or monitoring legislation across the country on laws that affect U.S.-born adoptees. But as I learned about the predicament that many intercountry adoptees had around citizenship and whether they had citizenship or did not have citizenship, I began to do work in the field of immigration to try to get that documentation that they need. After the election in November, it's all the work that I do. I only do immigration work at this point. I do occasional cases with U.S.-born adoptees, but almost everything I do relates to immigration. So I am certainly more an immigration attorney now who happens to do adoptee rights work.
Is that a place you thought you'd be in?
Never thought I'd be an immigration attorney. It's probably the second most complicated area of law behind tax law, and it is a very hard, large learning curve too. But luckily I'm only in this very small niche area of immigration, and that has to do with adult intercountry adopted people.
So walk me through what an average case would be. Is it that these adults are trying to make sure that they have documentation for their citizenship in case they get stopped by immigration enforcement, and either their adoptive parents don't have those documents or they were never there in the first place, or how does this work?
So I would say the most cases that I get relate to getting the documentation that they are entitled to have, and that's either a certificate of naturalization, a certificate of citizenship. They're different, but are the same thing. They're proof of U.S. citizenship. Or if they've lost one of those, getting a replacement certificate. Those are sort of the most common cases. They're getting the certificate in the first place, a certificate of citizenship in the first place, is very document intensive. And so that's taking up a lot of time in gathering those documents. But the work runs the gamut. It could be that someone needs to naturalize, and then we need to look at their prior history to determine, are there things that may disqualify them from naturalizing because they were never naturalized by their parents when they were children. And so that could be they have an interaction with the criminal justice system that's serious enough that they may not be able to naturalize, or they voted or claimed to be a U.S. citizen, reasonably believing that they were.
Sure.
And that is usually something that would disqualify them from naturalizing as well. So those are some of the naturalization cases. Some are easy, straightforward. They never voted. They don't have a criminal record. But those are part of that work that I do, is naturalizing people who never got naturalized as children. And that's part of the loophole of current law, where you have two groups, essentially. Those who needed to naturalize as children because the law didn't give them automatic citizenship, and they may never have naturalized, and they're not U.S. citizens today. And those that are later, coming into basically the 1990s, 2000s, where they arrived and they were citizens upon their arrival, essentially, but just don't have documentation of that. So we need to get a certificate of citizenship. So and then there's more complicated cases where a child has arrived in the U.S. There's no record of their arrival. There was something that the parents did to get this child to the U.S. so that they could adopt them, likely illegal, and there is no record of their entry, and so they have no lawful status in the U.S. And those are very, very complicated. If there even is a solution to those.
I want to take that second because I think when we're talking about risks right now about citizenship and things like arrest and deportation, I think that is a different kind of risk for those folks.
Oh, yeah.
You're telling me at the very beginning of this that there isn't an automatic naturalization process when you're adopted as a child from another country? If two U.S. citizens adopt you and you're not immediately a U.S. citizen?
You aren't, depending upon how old you were at the time of the adoption. And so until 2001, which is the current law, went into place. Now, if you arrive in the country on a particular visa that relates to adoption, you essentially are a U.S. citizen as soon as you arrive. There are some exceptions to that, but that's generally the gist of the current law. For those who were born prior to a very specific date, and that specific date is February 27th, 1983, meaning if they were 18 or over on the date of the new law, they did not qualify for automatic citizenship at any time. And they had to have their parents have naturalized them to essentially file a naturalization petition for them in court or with USCIS and get a naturalization certificate. Many parents did not do that for various reasons. It may have been too costly. They may have been told by the agency you didn't need to do that, or they just didn't, were neglectful. And so there are quite a few people like that who don't have citizenship because they were never naturalized as children and need to naturalize now.
So there is a whole class of people who are walking around that technically don't have status in the U.S.?
They have status. They arrived, and when they arrived, for the most part, they arrived as a legal permanent resident. So they do have green cards. Many don't even, when they come to me, they didn't even know they had a green card because they've lived their life believing that they're a U.S. citizen. Why would I need a green card if I'm a U.S. citizen? And so they're actually, when we request their records, there may be a copy of that green card in the file, and they're shocked to see that they had one. But so they are walking around, but they do have status. They just don't know often that they're not citizens, or they know that they're not citizens, and they just need to take that next step and naturalize.
Right, but for a lot of them, it's they're walking around thinking that their status is one thing, and it's actually another, which means that the law applies to them in a very, very different way.
Yes, I mean, yes, and especially if they run afoul of what is problematic in immigration, a criminal record, or they're like any other people. They have criminal records. They may have voted not knowing that they weren't citizens, and suddenly in a very enforcement-driven administration, those are real serious issues because the administration wants to get the number of people removed from the country as a number increased. And who knows who they're going to target next. And so that's why it's so unpredictable and a problem. But I mean, I've represented people who found out when they're in their 60s that they weren't U.S. citizens, and they were adopted as infants. They believed the entire time that they were a U.S. citizen because their parents were. And I have to say that, okay, if in order for you to get your retirement, we're going to try to get you naturalized.
Right. What are those conversations like? Because I have to imagine that finding out as an adult, whether it's 19 or 62, that finding out that what you thought of yourself and as an American citizen isn't the case, that has to be, I don't know how to phrase this. It has to be a really like upside down sort of feeling for a lot of these people.
Yeah, I think I can't speak for, I'm not an intercountry adoptee, so I can't really speak for how they felt at the time, but they are extremely confused, typically, very disappointed, and then fearful. It's like, what does this mean? And they have to rewrite their history, essentially, of how they lived in the country over all these years and not having U.S. citizenship. So it is very much a surprise. It's hard for me to tell them that, but I'm really straightforward. I'm an attorney. Attorneys are straightforward. You got to tell them how it is. And so it's shocking to many people that they also have this issue that they have to take care of, and it could be extremely expensive if they hire an immigration attorney. But luckily, I'm almost all pro bono. All of my work is free,
which is frankly incredible stuff, because I again, these are really, really expensive legal proceedings, and it's expensive legal work that if they went to somebody else, it would be extremely expensive. I do want to talk about this second group of people that we mentioned earlier, folks who were brought here illegally and are with families, they're adopted. How does that end up happening? And do those folks most oftentimes know that they're in the country undocumented, or how do they find out?
Well, they certainly don't know. I'm positive they don't know when they're children that they weren't brought in illegally or brought in without going through what they have to go through. It's when typically what happens is that you want to travel for a destination wedding, for instance, or you want to travel with a spouse that to Mexico or to somewhere else, and so you apply for a passport, and suddenly it's denied, and because you don't have proof of U.S. citizenship. So you think, okay, I got to gather up the proof of U.S. citizenship. Let me see what I can do. They can't find any documentation. So they start to ask their parents, if their parents still like, what's going on here? How am I not a citizen? And ultimately, there's no record of them in immigration because they were never an immigrant. They came here without paperwork. And so there's nothing to prove that they're here lawfully often. And so that's the problem, is trying to get them that status of being in lawful status. And so those are extremely, unless they're married to a U.S. citizen, that's sort of a key to getting lawful status. There's really no option for them unless they qualify for DACA, and DACA itself now doesn't take new applications.
Right. What are those conversations like?
Those are very hard. Because it's hard for me because I don't have a solution to many of the cases. And so the advice is lay low. Do what everyone does that they have to do in order to live in the United States, where it's now becoming much more of a show me your papers kind of country. Avoid immigration enforcement in some ways. Understand your rights, and then be in touch with me as your life changes, so that maybe there is an option to become at least a green card holder based upon your changed circumstances. So those are very hard conversations, because for me personally, I want to have a solution. I don't have one. And my advice is there's nothing we can do. I do like the ones where there is something to do, and we'll go forward with that. Again, this is very expensive just by paying the fees that you have to pay to USCIS. It's over $3,000 or more just for the filing fees for those kind of cases.
And which is not to say the rest of it. That's just
the filing fee.
Yeah, that's the cover charge.
Get into the door. Yeah, that's the cover charge. Exactly.
Yeah,
to get past the bouncer. Yeah.
So, would you say right now that adoptees that you work with are sort of targets for immigration enforcement? Because in the same way that we've seen ICE in states across the country, in courtrooms across the country, targeting people showing up to their legal court proceedings, if you've got clients who are actively seeking out their documents, if they're actively seeking a way to figure out if they have documents and they learn that they don't, are you worried that that's going to pop red flags for ICE right now, which is combing through a lot of these databases?
Yes, it's a great question. Yes and no. And I get this question a lot about how worried should I be based upon my status. And obviously it varies depending upon, well, you are already a U.S. citizen, you don't have proof, but so that's going to be an issue if you have to come up with proof. Let's get that proof for you, so you don't have to worry about that. Then there's green card holders, for instance, who are intercountry adoptees who have a criminal conviction that would disqualify them from naturalization. It may qualify, it may lead to removal from the U.S. And there's a couple of people that have removal orders, but they're not being deported, and they're intercountry adoptees out in California. And then there's those with no status at all, and there's just hard conversations to figure out what we can do. Yeah,
Those stories do kind of answer what I was asking, is that how worried are you, I think, about your clients being targeted by ICE right now? Because it would seem to me this is a small group compared to the larger group that ICE and immigration is targeting. But they're a group that has, I don't know, a level of visibility once they start looking for their documents that as DHS is trying to boost its arrest numbers, it would seem like this is a pretty, ripe fishing pond for them. Is that a thing you're worried about?
I am worried about it. I'm worried about it in the sense that they don't recognize the circumstances behind why their status may not be proper. And, these aren't typical cases where these are cases of people who are adopted by U.S. citizen parents. And so if they start to look more carefully, and I'm not sure they will, about this history, and then understand it, because intercountry adoption itself politically is an extremely popular um, uh, it's extremely popular way for creating a family in the U.S. And so politically, it's not it's a terrible thing to start targeting intercountry adoptees, because they're most of the parents are white, if not almost all, and it becomes a real political nightmare, I think, for any administration to start targeting intercountry adoptees. Now, are they going to go beyond just sort of the surface, like, oh, this is a green card holder, he has this criminal conviction, let's get him into ICE enforcement? I don't know. That's what I worry about most. Or I'm most worried about people getting caught up in raids or in some sort of ICE enforcement, and then have to, work to show proof that they are lawfully present in the U.S. and they don't have that proof.
There have been some reports of people who get caught up in these raids who have documentation, whether they're actual U.S. citizens or whether they're green card holders, or they have protective orders, but they keep those papers on them. And then you get ICE agents saying that those aren't real. There's been quite a bit of reporting about that. Have you had any of those clients yet?
No, I thankfully not. I mean, I haven't, I part of what I do is I offer too. There's a lot of worry about what happens if something were to happen, and so they have my phone number. I offer that to them. Even people who are traveling internationally, they're worried about re-entering the U.S. with their documentation. I put their flight on my calendar with the phone number. So yeah, I'm advising people to be very careful. This fear is not only real, but it's got some context to it. That there's unpredictable chaos, essentially, that is happening, and if you get caught up in that, how hard do you have to work to get yourself out of it? Because as we can see, people who are set for deportation are flown immediately down to Louisiana, and it's very hard to get in touch with them. And so that is something that I do fear a lot. But that's why we're working right now so hard and so swamped, to make sure people are prepared, have their documentation, have some sort of safety group around them that have their documents or know how to respond if something were to happen. And that's the work we're doing now within this community.
Do you have any clients right now who are missing that you're not able to get in touch with?
No, I don't. I've lost touch with some clients just because they've gone on to do other things, or I do know of people who are very much under the radar. They are deportable, and I'm not in much touch with them because they've sort of disappeared in some ways. But none that I don't have any clients that have been put into detention or in any kind of enforcement, other than I know a couple of people out in California that have had removal orders over their heads for quite some time.
How often do you lay awake at night and worry about the what ifs of this right now? Because as immigration enforcement is going to be increasing, because as they keep arresting people, the population of people they're going to go after is dwindling. So how often do you
Exactly.
lay awake at night and worry about the what ifs of all of this?
I guess there's two things. I worry about how fearful everyone is. I worry about that a lot. But then I do worry about it at night, in the morning especially. I wake up every morning, 6 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning. I'm immediately going to work on figuring out, okay, where's the status of this case right now? What can we do? And it's those ones on the edges that we've already talked about, where the client doesn't have lawful status. They're going through immigration procedures to get that status, and it's very stressful to do that. And I would say too that normally, if we were a year ago, I had a client that um, was not a citizen. He was a green card holder, an intercountry adoptee, and wanted to naturalize. And let's say they had a DUI on their record. That would not be a big deal. A DUI on your record in the past, no big deal. You'd probably naturalize. Or you voted, there is an exception to voting if if both parents were U.S. citizens. So that's something you could overcome. Now I'm much more careful in advising them whether to go forward or not, and saying, let's just hang tight. If you don't have a valid green card right now, let's maybe apply for a green card, because that's much less. There's no interview. They don't really look at it as carefully as they do for naturalization. And so I'm holding back on many naturalizations for my clients because of the fear that they may get placed into removal proceedings because of just the various history that they have.
As you said that, I sort of had this deep sadness thinking about the fact that these are people who have lived their lives thinking their lives were going to be one way and were one way, and then all of a sudden you had to tell them to be cautious about pursuing their dreams, the American experience that they were brought into, whether by choice or not, depending on how they got here. That has to be also a difficult thing, especially you're also an adoptee. That has to be a difficult thing to talk to those people about.
The one thing that I can relate to with intercountry adoptees, being an adopted person myself, is this deep sense and sometimes fear of whether you belong. Right? I think that is common with many adopted people. And then you have on top of that with intercountry adoptees, whether you even legally belong in the country, whether you're welcome in the country. And I think the message has been, especially if they're subject to deportation for serious crimes, in the past, is that you may not be as if born to your adoptive parents, which is really what adoption claims to be. And you may not be welcome in the country because you're sort of you're here on a trial basis in some ways, like do right. And if you become a citizen, great. But if you mess up along the way because your parents didn't get you citizenship, we're going to ship you back to where you were born and where you have zero connections at this point.
So not just deeply othering, but also dangerous.
Yeah, dangerous and life-changing and, debilitating, everything.
When we talk about this too, and the reason that I've been thinking about this is that there is a case that the Supreme Court's going to take up about broader birthright citizenship. Do you see the work you're doing as sort of this, I don't know, pick your metaphor, tip of the iceberg, canary in the coal mine for how this administration is going to approach legal citizenship?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because in some ways I do think adoptees are canaries in a coal mine, in the sense that, are we really going to go there?
Mm-hmm.
And are we really going to target this population that, as you said earlier, had no choice in coming here, had no say in their adoption? Most of them were adopted as infants or toddlers. And suddenly they're thrust into this world where they don't have the rights that their parents have. They're often the biological siblings, or their siblings that were biological children of their adoptive parents. So they don't have the same rights as them. And so that's deeply troubling. And it does worry me.
Yeah, I think, and sort of what I mean by this is do you see an administration, do you see an immigration policy being set up to go after the citizenship of adopted people to then use it as like a test balloon? There's my third metaphor. There you go.
I mean, I just think politically, I can't see any administration doing that, because, intercountry adoption for many, many years, and probably still today, is a very much a faith-based development. The Holts back in Korea were fundamental Christians, and many churches encourage intercountry adoption and think of it as a faith-based way to form a family. So the politics of that are terrible for any administration to start to crack down and start to disassemble these families by deporting or using enforcement provisions against their children. There may be adult children at this point, but I don't see that happening. But again, everything is so unpredictable right now that you still have to plan for it as if it could happen.
Right. Because in immigration enforcement here, and I know you don't have a lot of time, in immigration enforcement, now we've seen from this administration that they're doing a lot of unpopular things like raiding schools and houses of worship and office buildings and not going after the people they said they were going after. And so I think that to have these worries and to talk about these worries with you, isn't outlandish.
It's not. No.
Not at all. I'm not even sure if it even is like on the fringe. I think it's probably dead center of all these things that we're talking about right now. The last thing I want to ask you about before I let you go, because I know you've got a hard out here, is that what would you tell somebody right now who is an adopted person who is worried about their status, whether they know that they have their documents or not? What would you tell them?
The first thing I tell them is that your fear is real. I mean, I want to acknowledge that fear. I'm not going to downplay it. I'm not going to say you don't need to worry about it. And then I talk about, okay, these are the things that I recommend that we do. And this is basically, let's get everything together that makes you feel at least safer in the country and makes you feel as if you have all the documentation that you need in case something were to happen. That's my basic advice, and that's my basic work. And it's kind of sad that we have to do that to assure them over and over and over that, one, you are welcome here, you belong here, but here's what we're going to have to do to make you stay here. It's just such a disconnect to me. But yeah. I always have to acknowledge that fear because I'm afraid that people in their own families, people in their communities are all saying, well, don't worry about it, you're overthinking it, but we're not in their shoes. We don't live in that as adopted people as well as immigrants because they are immigrants by law. They came here as immigrant children. And so I think those are the things that I tell them and I talk about first before we start that sometimes hard work of getting everything they need in order to become a citizen, in order to be lawfully present, or to get proof of that citizenship so that they can just move on a little less worried in their world.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you.
I want to thank Greg again for coming on the show. You can find links to the Adoptee Rights Law Center as well as Adoptee Rights, Inc., which has citizenship clinics happening right now in the show notes to this episode. And that is it for this episode. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below. If you're a watcher on YouTube, sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. And as always, share the show on social media. It's MIMS Newspod, MIMS Newspod, all one word on every platform. You can find me at Granthermes on X and Bluesky and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you next week.